All right, let's get this show on the road. When I actually saw the theme was Isekai, the first thing that came in my mind were these two games. Essentially, these are the Storyboard games. There were only two in this small series, which were Sonic and the Secret Rings and Black Knight. Now, when I started actually making this PowerPoint, there was actually something that came up to my mind, which is, what other Sonic games could technically count as Isekai? Turns out way more than you probably want to admit. There's Sonic Rush Adventure, where they end up in Blaze's world after going face first into a tornado. Then there's Sonic Shuffle, where they wake up in the world of dreams. Then there's just Sonic X, which if you consider to be canon, you can make a very loosely tied connection to both Sonic Adventure games being Isekai, but I'm not going to say I believe that because I will get people in here to murder me. So if you know anything about Secret Rings, it's probably the fact that it started out as a Wii port for Sonic 06. And that's usually where the conversation ends. So let's actually talk about Sonic 06 briefly. Development for the game actually began somewhere in 2004 with a planned release for 360, PS3, PC, and Nintendo Next Gen console. Turns out they didn't actually get a Wii dev kit until around 2005 or 6. And then they got the dev kit and realized, wait, this is just a GameCube except slightly faster. And so, at that point, no offense to the Wii, I love that console. And then they're like, well, we can't have this handle Sonic 06, and by the way, the PS3 couldn't handle it either. So, they also needed to basically build it down for Wii and then readjust the controls because you were dealing with this. So, at that point, they're like, well, we're not porting Sonic 06 to the Wii, but Sega still wanted to do something, so in order to continue to make the development cycle for Sonic 06 even worse, they decided to split Sonic Team in half to work on a separate game, which would eventually become Secret Rings, which originally was supposed to be some party game. Yojiro Ogawa was the producer, director, and game designer for Secret Rings. He joined Sega in 1995 and was mainly just a director for a bunch of the Mega Collection games. He was also the designer for the mission modes, which means he was solely responsible for this. We do not talk about Mission 53 in this household. So, there's actually a couple interviews that I want to talk about regarding Secret Rings, and first thing we want to talk about is why the Arabian Nights? The director, Ogawa, said essentially that, systems still call the revolution. We want to revolutionize the story of the Arabian Nights. They wanted to differentiate Secret Rings from Sonic 06 because 06 for the PS3 actually came out after the 360 version. So when development started, they wanted Sonic to just go into a completely different world, and going into the Arabian Nights would allow them to add magic and stuff like that. Not really used that much in the final game, but, I'm getting ahead of myself. They also took a lot of inspiration from God of War, Shadow of the Colossus, and Prince of Persia, and I'm reading this quote here directly. At one point, I wanted Sonic to perform a move where he would jump off the back of a bird and start ripping its feathers out, but people thought it was too violent for a children's game. Didn't stop them from Sonic uppercutting a phoenix and then grabbing his head and then body slamming it in Sonic Unleashed, but, details. And you might also realize that dinosaurs aren't in the Arabian Nights. Ogawa added it just because he thought it was cool. Also, since this was an IGN interview, there was an IGN moment. Do you think Sega will ever make a more mature game like God of War, and would you like to work on it, completely unaware that Yakuza came out less than a year prior? So at that point, systems still call the revolution. Let's revolutionize Sonic. And so they already apparently had an idea of just Sonic running forward in a straight path, kind of on rails. How they came up with this control scheme, they used the nunchuck, they used the Wii Remote vertically, which apparently some people like Jay's Review still did in their childhood regardless. And the goal was essentially just make the gameplay simple so that users could play it for a long time, unaware that would end up biting them in the butt. So they also wanted to use different buttons and gestures. They wanted to have what essentially a speed break in the final game be done with a swing of the remote. Thank the Lord that they didn't go with that. And then they also went on to argue that they didn't use motion control that much. The jokes write themselves. So, originally they actually wanted to make another adventure game. And then they're like, well, Sonic fans are asking for a new game, so let's just do that instead. I'm getting ahead of myself into the skill system of Sonic and the Secret Rings, but I want to mention something from the Nintendo Power article where they said, and I am quoting Ogawa directly here, I realized that many of the other characters in the series were becoming too strong. Usually when we create a Sonic title, we create the Sonic parts first and then add some powers to each of the other characters to differentiate them. But as a result, those other characters end up being stronger than Sonic. Now we suddenly care about power scaling in this franchise, and not even to mention that, It's mostly Sonic's fault. Like, do I need to... Super Sonic and just, he is only killable by drowning, being crushed to death, or falling in a bottomless pit. Hypersonic is only killed by bottomless pit or being crushed to death. Those two also have screen nukes, by the way. That's Hyper Knuckles. And don't even get me started in Tails and his...
Flicky army of death.
So... Oh, and then there's Sonic just casually defying all laws of physics by just, just standing on water. He could just stand in that, by the way. And don't even get me started on him using Chaos Control for the first time in Sonic Adventure 2 with a fake emerald.
It has the same wavelength and properties, but is less powerful than the real one.
The same wavelength and properties. Can I do this?
I feel some strange energy.
But yes, this is totally Black Doom's fault. And that first Nintendo Power article that came out, which isn't the one that I have with me, it sucks. If you read it, it's just knowing what Secret Rings is like now, you're like, what were they playing? Stuff like this. No wonky camera, no Big the Cat. Sure. And then they went on to say that the bosses were really good, and all I can say is, what game were you playing? And then, of course, there was the party mode, which is like, I can at least give them that. It was like, at least better than Mario Party 9, but that isn't really something to be proud of. Alright, so this actually was shown at E3 2006, so let's talk about some of the stuff from there. At this point, Sonic and the Secret Rings was still called Sonic Wildfire, and there's a couple things from here that I want to mention, some level design differences, because it just was Sand Oasis. Here is, of course, the Wild Gauge, before we got the Soul Gauge. It looked like that, and you would swing the Wii Remote to dash, which that got changed in the final release. This wasn't here in the final release, and I think this was just to show, hey, these switches do something. This was a little bit more open. These pillars didn't magically shoot up in the way that it is here. And of course, these pillars were definitely not in the final game because, oh my goodness. If that was in the final game, I probably would have thrown my TV through the remote as a kid. And then, of course, the results screen's a bit different, but that's it. And then Sonic does a stupid grin. So, funnily enough, those review scores are not fake. Those are the actual review scores for Sonic and the Secret Rings when it came out. An 85, 80, 76, 76, and a 69 from IGN. And a 69 from IGN is probably something that should be considered a miracle in this franchise. And you might be wondering as to how this happened. All of this is because of how much damage Sonic 06 did to this game, to this franchise's reputation. Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood, which is considered one of the worst games in this entire franchise, was given a 74 on Metacritic. And unlike Sonic 06, which actually just had decent level design, it just had some of the worst optimization known to man, it's just a showing of how much damage that did. Now we can get into the game proper, and I want to talk about the soundtrack first because that's where we should start. It's composed by Chun Chukumi. Just as a fair reminder, if I mispronounce this stuff, please keep in mind that I'm from the South, raised by Midwestern grandparents. Fumi Kumatani, Seiro Okamoto, and Kenichi Tokoi. It's the second game of the series to feature Rumblebee for the vocals, which the first one was Riders. This soundtrack is fine. The major issue is just a lot of the songs are extremely repetitive, and that's also the case for Black Knight. The problem is that Black Knight's soundtrack's actually really good. I edited this bit in my now debunked editing software, HitFilm. Thank you, Artless, for killing it. Super Bowl runs. By itself, we're good. It's fine. The problem is that it plays all the time. It's used for when you boot the game up with the Wii menu. It's the Adventure Main menu theme and also the Mission Complete, Mission Fail theme. Which begs the question, how many times at minimum do you have to listen to Seven Rings in Hand? So based on the world record standard, there's around 47 mandatory missions since the song plays at the end result screen, and then the menu multiply that by 2. Add one for the final boss, add one for a cutscene, add one for the Wii menu theme, and then you get around 97 times minimum you have to listen to the song, assuming I counted right. So it actually begins at Sonic's house, so technically this is a sequel to Sonic Labyrinth, don't play it. He's asleep and then he rubs a ring and a genie named Shara comes out. If you know anything about the Arabian Nights, there are two genies. Shara is the other one, not the one based on the genie from Aladdin. And Shara essentially informs Sonic, hey, there's this person in the Eraser Chain who's just deleting pages from the Arabian Nights, please stop him. And this is where we get into the game structure. Unlike other games in this franchise, it's mission-based. There are 7 worlds, not counting Lost Prologue, because who cares about that place, with around 10 to 14 missions each. There's always a primary get-to-the-goal mission, and that's relatively lengthy, around 2 to 4 minutes, and then everything else is relatively short. You are not told which missions are mandatory for story progression.
That's awful.
Lost Prologue's actually a really neat in concept. It's just the lost pages from the book. I love it. I hate the fact that it's so short and just a circle. It is just a waste of potential, and the first 8 levels are just getting used to the controls. So here's a somewhat live demonstration. Here's my Wii remote. That is not supposed to be like that. So essentially, you use the 2 button to jump, 1 button to brake, D-pad up for speed brake, down for time brake, press for pausing, and then everything else is motion controls. You tilt the remote left and right to move Sonic, flick the remote forward for a jump after a homing attack, and you can go backward by doing this. And does that sound awkward? Because it definitely is in gameplay. For anything more complex, just shake the remote until it works. And then grinding on rails just doesn't work.
Yeah, there it goes.
Yeah. Apparently just has a mind of its own. The other thing is that in order to accelerate, you have to lightly tap the 2 button, and then it wants you to also jump off the rail, and so it's both tied to the 2 button, which nothing new for this franchise. They're putting in a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be on one button. But you know, just anything else, even with Wii Motion Plus, it's just you're at the mercy of the Wii actually getting your input. And that's why grinding on rails just doesn't work. And then there's just the skill system. Essentially, has anybody here played Need for Speed Undercover? Okay, cool. I actually have a more positive viewing on that because that was my first Need for Speed game, and Pendulum's in the soundtrack, and I love that. So it's essentially a very simple system that appears complex. You get every level that you unlock, which you get experience from playing through levels. You get more SP to equip skills up to level 99. And the issue isn't that you get more powerful, it's what they will do it to restrict that. Restrict your movement in order to make it feel more progressive. Some stuff, like, you know, having extra rings at the start, more experience when you do certain moves, stuff like that being an equipable skill, I get, and I actually like that. Sonic and the Black Knight does something similar. Others like having certain moves that have attack hitboxes that don't also work pretty well. What I can't excuse is having the backstep being an unlockable ability, given how completely necessary it is for backtracking. Other stuff, and this is the main thing here, most of the skills are just previous skill, but better. Previous skill, but you go faster. Previous skill, but you move left to right easier. To be fair, I don't think the system is bad in concept, it's just, again, this is a 2007 Sega game, so it wasn't exactly implemented in the way that it should have been. So eventually we find the Eraser Gem, and he shoots a fire at Shara, and instead Sonic gets it. He is told to find all 7 world rings and find it before the fire runs out and kills him. So they go to the Sand Oasis to find King Shahryar. And this is the first major area of the game. It's actually not too terrible, and this is where we get to the game's level design. Sonic Force is bad, please clap. So, Secret Rings is entirely on rails, but actually this level has that in mind, and I don't think it's bad in concept to have Sonic on rails. This is partially because I'm a Geometry Dash tryhard, so let me just talk about Sonic Brothers real quick, which was a free-to-play mobile game that was an auto-run. It was 2D with multiple pathways, it was on the set course, and then there's Sonic Dash, which is just meh. So essentially, Sonic Brothers was just Geometry Dash, but without the rhythm platformer element. Essentially, the difficulty is then shifted to having a good reaction time instead of both having a good reaction time and routing. So, as a Geometry Dash player, I don't mind this change as a spin-off. But that involves the level design to be good. Secret Rings doesn't really accomplish this very well. While the main mission's controls work fine enough, stage gimmicks like the wind and levitated ruin, don't even get me started on that, and then grinding on rails just make this nearly impossible. And then, of course, there's the mission structure, which I think is fine in concept too. You know, get to the goal, defeat X number of enemies, collect X number of rings, you know, don't get hit, don't die. You're given a bronze, silver, or gold, or no medal at all, only using your final time to calculate it. So, you know, just equip all the speed skills and ignore everything else. You also get fire souls in some missions, which give extra experience points, I think. There's no confirmation on this. I can only base this on my own experience. And it also unlocks stuff for party mode. There's a few problems here. Some of the missions are just too demanding for what they want for you, and they're pretty slow, and you have to break constantly. This happens with a lot of the post-game missions. You aren't told which missions are mandatory for story progress, so you end up doing this stupid egg sorting thing in Dinosaur Jungle. So we then arrive at King Sharior's castle, and I haven't really mentioned this, so I guess I'll go ahead over this. You might notice that the presentation's a bit weird in terms of how the game is shown and in terms of cutscenes. Essentially, it's like this comic book style way of doing it. It's the Storybook series. Wow, it uses like a comic book thing to tell a story. And it's really cool. Also to note is that a lot of the main characters in these games are shown off with actual Sonic characters who are like, Sonic's like, hey, you're Dr. Eggman, what are you doing here? Hey, Sharior's like, what? Who are you? Get out of my house. So, eventually, Sharior gets kidnapped, kind of on brand, and then they eventually go and save Alibaba for Dinosaur Jungle, only to stop and beat up a yellow scorpion. Or a purple scorpion. Despite having no relevance to the Arabian Nights, it's definitely memorable, and I read somewhere where all of the dinosaur models from this were ripped straight from Dinosaur King, but I'm not sure about that. It has some of the most mind-numbing missions of the game. Again, egg sorting mission, and I do really like the dinos though. So then we go and find Sharior, and then only go to Eagle Foundry after Eraser summons Ifrit, and then we go back to Alibaba. He says we should go and fight Sinbad. Evil Foundry is an ancient palace that wants you dead. It also has Transformers, I think. It has that one funny Sonic YouTuber song. I'm not going to tell you why he doesn't upload anymore. It's very unique in presentation and theming, but this is pretty much just something to kind of go with this franchise. In just this game in general, level design leaves much to be desired. After this, we get the Soul Gauge, which essentially those pearls that we've been collecting the entire time, they finally come into play, and they fill out this little gauge, which is at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Essentially, you can press up to do speed break, which does not give you invulnerability frames, even though they should. And then there's time break, which just slows everything down. It makes everything at like 5 FPS. Levitated Ruin is just, you run on the back of giant bird fossils. This is one of my favorite levels and level concepts in the entire franchise. Has anybody here played Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Okay, yes. If you have played through the Leftherian Archipelago, this is kind of similar as to how that works, kind of, except you're jumping from place to place. Problem is that it's the worst area in the game because you have to deal with winds that blow you back constantly. And then there's 2D sections, which, who put this in here? Also, it's going to attack a certain ledge gate needs to happen. Don't worry, he's getting there. Like every Sonic game, there's a handful of glitches here that are useful for speedrunning. So of course we find Sinbad locked in a cage. Sinbad says, hey, go find this blue ring that gives you the power to essentially become Zeus. And then of course we get there, and before we leave, I'm just gonna let this cutscene play out. If you already know what this is, just keep in mind, don't spoil for what is said at the very end. Why didn't it play? Of course it.
That's... It must be another one of the 7 world rings.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Okay. All right. Just touching it makes me feel like I've got a whirlpool of emotion spiraling around inside me. I can't even begin to imagine what having all 7 rings would do to someone. It might even open the gates of hell.
No idea. He's living basically.
So you might be wondering as to why it's raining in Arabia. Well, as a meteorology student, this is forecasted. How would this make sense? Well, fun fact, there's actually tropical cyclones that happen in the Arabian Sea. They're not common, but they do happen. For example, in 2007, we had Cyclone Gona, which struck parts of Oman and Iran after peaking as a 165-mile-per-hour Category 5 cyclone. Given the fact that the rain's going sideways, but there isn't much wind, we can kind of assume here, assuming that you completely ignore what this is based on, that this is happening in the midst of a tropical depression's outer band. That's it. That's enough weather out of me for one day. So eventually we go back, beat Ifrit, and we, with the power of rain, we leave, get another rain, Palestine explodes, and then we go to Skeleton to consult with King Solomon. Yes, the same one from the Old Testament. So, Skeleton Dome is the most open of the worlds design-wise, and it allows for some exploration, shows that Sonic can work in this system. In concept. The missions are fine, they're just not really anything worthy of note here. King Solomon had his bones taken away, we help him, and then we're told, hey, you need the White Ring in order to get to Razor's Palace, and so we eventually get there. Night Palace is visually one of my favorite areas in the game. You go in between the Night Palace and this area in space. Level design sucks though. Also, you can have this happen, for example.
The Wii U, the DS version was fine. The Wii U was not.
If you're wondering, I just walked over where that hole was missing and died instantly. And then you fight a Razor. This fight sucks. You can call this like a skill issue if you want, but that happened to me all the time when I was trying to beat this. So, surprise, forced credits even if you got all 7 gold rings. Eraser hides behind a door and this, I guess, makes for a good time to do the Wordle. So we find Eraser, Shara gives him all the gold rings. Turns out that was a bad idea. Shara ends up dead because Eraser tries to kill Sonic. And then Eraser becomes Wayla Walela, which actually translates to 1001 Nights. And then Sonic absorbs, becomes 3 rings to become Dark Spine Sonic, and here's one of the worst fights in the entire series. So you have to build up the soul gauge in order to kick the ball back at Eraser. Here's what you have to do in order to beat the final boss. Turns out, it turns into a match to see how long you can shake your arms before you throw your Wii remote into a wall. So it turns out the ball that we got from Shara and Levitator Road was Eraser's lamp, also we got that. Sonic gives 3 wishes, the last one being Eraser to go into the lamp, and then he wishes for a mountain of handkerchiefs for Shara. Yeah, this is dumb. I think the writing and characterization is actually pretty good. Nowhere near as good as it is in Black Knight. There are also extra missions. They suck. I didn't bother with them. This is one of the worst console Sonic games I've ever played, even though I have a lot of nostalgia for this. And even though it's not as bad as Free Riders, I still won't recommend this. I do want to briefly talk about the task, because there is a task for this, and here's some clips from that.
Leave it to me.
This next mission
Don't worry, we'll get him in no time.
He's trying to find time.
In the
Why
void.
was it astronaut for space whenever we broke I recommend watching the task in your free time by Ring Rush. There's also a party mode for those who really. Why would you play this? Like, honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, it's better than Mario Party 9, but that isn't really saying much. If you have Mario Party 8, you're better off playing that. Or, if you hate yourself, you can play Dokapon Kingdom or 100% Orange Juice. It is better than Sonic Shuffle, that isn't saying much, but I will say you get to do this.
Silver, no.
Absolutely amazing. Now, I want to preface this next statement for those who want to play this, and it is something that my totally real lawyers that exist, because I totally have money as a college student, wrote me, I am not encouraging you to do the following.
Your heart being a pirate is a recipe.
You can get a physical copy for 10 to 15 bucks. That's too much for this. And you can play this with your very legal personal copy. So, where you can remap the controls and whatnot. But what I recommend doing is actually what's recently been in development, which is Project Reignition. It's currently a fan project that is currently on the process to bring Sonic and the Secret Rings to PC with a new engine, gameplay tweaks, and grinding on rails finally works. It's still in the very early stages of development. All we have is Dinosaur Jungle and Evil Foundry. But now let's talk about Black Knight. Fun fact, there isn't much regarding the development of this game. Turns out nobody cared after Secret Rings turned out to be a bad game. Tatsuo Katano was the director for this, and he mainly worked as a programmer for 3D Blast, the adventure games, Heroes, Secret Rings, and he also directed and produced Generations 3DS. If you couldn't tell between these two, one of these is easily superior. It's Black Knight. So the ideas for sequel actually came up when the game was still in development in January of 2007, on brand for this franchise. And Katano thought of a setting of swords and sorcery, and eventually they landed on King Arthur. When giving Sonic a sword, there was actually pushback, just how there was whenever they decided to give Shadow a gun. But given Sonic was going into a book, it was kind of given a pass, and the children thought it was cool. So there isn't much on this. We know it runs with the same engine as Sacred Rings for the sole purpose that Sand Oasis is still in the game files. The most interesting stuff comes from this Nintendo Power magazine that I bought myself for about $20.
Wow. I think I still have that copy.
Well, that's good. When it comes to swordplay, the lead designer apparently tried multiple times to see how they could work with it. The most important thing to note is that the movement has gone to the control stick. I heard that straight from the table. So, the skill system was also going to be reworked, but there's one thing that I want to mention that was in that magazine. Those red fairy dash panels and those purple fairies are not in the final game. Of course, you can thank my lovely phone quality here. The red ones act as a springboard while blue ones give them a Sonic speed boost. They were all changed speed boost in the end. It turns out that Honeymoon from Sonic 06 didn't apply to Black Knight, as it was rated worse than Sacred Rings. But as it turns out, Black Knight would end up being a game that was actually good, at least in my opinion. So Jun Tsuno, who you might know for being the main guy behind the Sonic Adventure games soundtracks, is back. There's multiple vocal tracks in the Crush 40. And hot take, I think this is one of, if not the best soundtrack in the entire franchise. Yes, Tommy Tallarico, the guy who was responsible for the Roblox oof noise being taken off of Roblox, was also credited in the game, even though, of course, he took 3 songs from Todd Dennis, who just simply worked for the company, and said he was the composer instead. What else were you expecting from this guy? Now, before I get any further, I do want to mention that I don't know anything about this, but I did watch this cute little documentary called Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is we're going to go ahead and go with it. So King Arthur is chasing after a wizard, and obviously there's a guy with coconuts behind him. Of course, we know that she's a wizard because she is a duck made out of wood. So Merlina summons Sonic, which everybody and their mother has probably told you that it's nearly identical to what Razor Jin did in order to summon Ifrit, which means that he's kind of seen as a devil in this universe. And of course, he's about to go ham with King Arthur, and then Merlina's like, nope, you can't beat him. And then Sonic's like, what do you mean? I am literally the entire reason this franchise has power creep. So then we get to Misty Lake, and this is a great starting area, maybe just an atmosphere, and let's finally talk about our controls. Just because we're working with the control stick here, movement is a lot better. Actually, controlling Sonic is great just because of that. And then, of course, there's the sword play. It's very clunky on the ground, but there's one move. The Buzzsaw of Death. When you only attack and swing the Wii remote, you basically just become this. You become essentially a buzzsaw with homing properties. It makes that mission in Giant or Great Call. I forgot what it was named. In that stage in particular, really fun. And then of course we got the skill system replaced with the styles of the Knight, which is balanced, and each of these have a certain skill. So Knight, you can give rings to townspeople without interacting with them. Cavalier, you can swing your sword without slowing it down, which automatically makes it the best in the entire game. And then Paladin, which increases your speed further, but it doesn't really matter that much because final time isn't the only thing that's considered into your final rating at the final whenever you beat the level. That is the star system, and your skill proficiency in each style goes up with more stars that you get. You also get followers in this game, which certain skills will lag behind those. In order to get them, you have to play the stage over and over again. Yes, it is tedious for 100%. Also, there's a morality system in this game, as you get emblems that give score multipliers. And those special skills that I just mentioned do not work if you have negative emblems. You also get items that you can unlock, which seems mostly useless, but you do get some stuff like, you can get rings at the start of the level, more ID points, and prevent the player from harming their reputation. So yes, you can kill all those townspeople without consequence, you monster. It's still the mission structure, the levels are overall shorter. But now we know which ones are mandatory. If they have that little blue circle icon, that means it's optional. So essentially the missions range from getting to the goal, not getting hit, yada yada yada. Well, not all of the missions are fun. The rush hour missions and the green given missions suck. Mostly, the level design pretty much accomplishes what it needs to do here. Bosses are still pretty bad, though. So we go and finally, Merlina beats Sonic Caliburn, which is a sword that talks, which again, honestly kind of on brand for this franchise. And shortly after King Arthur shows up, the two fight, but the scabbard makes him immortal and basically responds with "tis but a scratch." Sonic then goes to the blacksmith of Camelot, and hopefully the Knights of the Round Table aren't doing a musical number. So, at Castle Camelot, it's pretty straightforward. It's the castle area. You take out a massive statue with a crossbow, it's cool. It has some tutorials, but none of the missions are really bad. You also unlock the soul gauge, which acts like speed break when you're not around enemies, but you can also lock onto them, and whenever you swing at the right time when the reticle is white, you get a perfect hit. That increases your meter at the bottom left side of the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, just to keep the chain going. It is really satisfying, and I really do like it. And of course, then we go and meet the blacksmith, we go and try and find Lady of the Lake, we find Sir Lancelot, who is Shadow, and a fight ensues. And then we finally meet Lady of the Lake, and she tells you, please save the townspeople, offer compassion to those in need, defeat the Knights of the Round Table, and what is the airspeed velocity of the Modulated European swallowing, can it carry coconuts? So Deep Woods is actually not really memorable for me, and it's mainly just because Shrouded Forest exists, and it's just this but better. The intro to the stage, though, and especially for the get to the goal mission, is being on a horse for about a minute, and it's just a waiting game, and I don't like it. So eventually we find a little girl who says a dragon took her family, and Sonic says that, hey, we're gonna save you, and Caliburn scolds him for it. But actually, I think they mistook the dragon for something else. I think we actually have a real picture of what it's supposed to be. There we go. That should be right. So Titanic Plain is just a giant field full of giant parts of people who are arrested for criticizing the king or jaywalking. I don't know. So there's giant orcs that are dragging them around, and going through the middle of the rocks are fun too. I do need to complain about the perfect challenge, though. You may call this a skill issue, and honestly, it probably is. But this is a post-game mission that I think is complaining about. Most of the perfect challenges last about a minute. This lasts around 5, and that's like 5 minutes without getting hit. Also, that can happen whenever you're doing Soul Search, and I got soft locked doing this mission. Then we find Sir Gawain. If you know any cutscene from this game, it's probably this one.
Oh yeah, I remember this. Oh boy.
To lose to a mere apprentice, I have been disgraced. Only death can remove this stain upon my honor.
Rated everyone 10 and above. So ignoring that, it turns out that little girl was the Lady of the Lake, and we're told to go to Molten Mine and find Percival. But first we have to go over Crystal Cave, which is just forgettable because dragons there exist. That's actually kind of a running theme because you unlock stuff after you beat King Arthur, and that ends up being more interesting in terms of its overall aesthetic. Molten Mine is awesome though. We don't get a lot of volcano levels, generally speaking, in this franchise, at least to the insanity that this is. You're starting out on the outskirts of a local mining town, you go your way up through the mountains, it's great. It also has the best song in the entire soundtrack, Fight Me. Eventually we find Percival, saves her from lava. This entire time, by the way, Caliburn's been calling us Nate the Hedgehog. And eventually he becomes Sir Sonic instead. And then we finally go and fight King Arthur. It is more interesting, but it's also frustrating because of essentially the waggle QTEs cycle. Also, I didn't mention this whenever I went over the Soul Search, but if you shake the nunchuck instead of the leader mode, you do a kick. In case you're wondering as to what happens whenever you do that in the Arthur fight. And we finally beat Arthur and Fake out once again. In case you're wondering, I didn't get the horror right whenever I was playing this. And I think it's in fact just a little flesh wound. Okay, maybe more than a flesh wound now that I can see it there. Turns out Merlina's the villain the whole time, and actually I think this was really well handled because this was a complete surprise to me as a kid. And then we get quite possibly my favorite cutscene, one of my favorite cutscenes in the entire franchise. I miss CG cutscenes in this franchise, by the way. And they said Sonic with a sword was way. Now we get new levels that offer remixes of previous stage themes. This level, the first one after beating King Arthur, is awesome. You're going through this what's left of Castle Camelot. You're just running through, trying to get out as fast as possible as this black hole of death above the castle is trying to absorb you and everything around it. You're trying to escape it. The music is just so tense. Essentially, it's just feelings in this franchise that I haven't felt in a really long time. Eventually, they get out, the knights are like, well, guess we give up now. And Sonic's like, you're the Knights of the Round Table, do something. And so they finally decide to go to 4 separate locations and set up a barrier to prevent Merlina's corruption or something. We're not told what it is. At this point, the knights are playable. But only in Knights Passage, Sharded Forest, Great Megalith, the Cauldron, and Dragon's Lair. Yep, you can't use them in any of the previous levels because, of course, Sega somehow screwed this up. The materials you collect now go to making them new weapons, which replaces the styles for them. The problem is, and this is especially as I try to play Percival, they aren't really that fun in comparison to Sonic. Not only because the combat system that they have is a little bit, I'd say worse, but the controls for Blaze in particular of her double jump homing attack hybrid thing just doesn't work. Unless you have their god weapons, in which case Shadow becomes the best character in the entire game by just having a soul search ability that's essentially Chaos Blast. Regardless, I would just stick to Sonic. I love Sharded Forest in concept. It's this like frozen over forest with like purple plants everywhere. It's beautiful. I also want to mention these two games visually speaking here, because I haven't mentioned them and I'm really bad at this. So these two games, for being early Wii games, at least for Secret Rings, is actually pretty okay in terms of visuals. Black Knight, I'd even say, is a little bit better than that as well. Of course, if you're running this on Dolphin with your very legal copy, it will look a lot better as well. I don't like the post-game missions for this area, but I really do dig the setting. And then we get Great Megalith, which is just a slightly more interesting Titanic plane. You get to, save more prisoners, and it does have that combo mission that I mentioned. But it also has the Cauldron, which is the worst area in the game because it's just molten mine, but worse. If you've ever played this stage, you probably know where I'm going with this. A lot of the stages are just really slow. There's one that's dedicated to just climbing up a wall and collecting fairies. It is not very fun or interesting. And then there's the sword swing missions. What those are is that you get a limited amount of sword swings. Now, there's one in Misty Lake that I really like, and you can do in like 2 sword swings. It's really fun. Here, you're pretty much just at the will of, will my buzzing home saw actually do what I want it to? And then we get Dragon's Lair, which is better than Crystal Cave. It has an actual dragon, and while the collapsing floors aren't great, I'm just a sucker for purple stuff. Purple is my favorite color, and so I like this. It also has the Lightning Road, which is a Geometry Dash player I giggle to myself every single time I see it. So then we finally get the barrier set up, but then Sonic faces resistance from a dragon. We actually have a league draft of what it looks like. And of course, Sonic beats it technically.
When suddenly, the animator suffered a fatal heart attack.
Same thing, really. So it turns out the bear is too weak and Sonic has to go in and confront Merlina herself. And Merlina states that Gawain and Lancelot will cause King Arthur to fall. But, of course, in that documentary, we all know the real reason. Yeah, King Arthur just straight up killed a historian. So, essentially, Merlina wants the Endless Now. She wants an eternal kingdom. I say Endless Now because I can't escape my 10th grade literature class. She's going through an existential crisis, and then Sonic puts 2 and 2 together with the rose that she finally gets up, and he's having none of it.
What good is a world that goes on forever?
My soul at its ruin runs deeper than the depths of the underworld. Do you not understand?
No, and I don't want to.
He just wants to open up the
He's
gates of
just
hell.
going at it, though.
Yeah, that's why he goes with secret.
His reasoning behind it is actually somewhat good. It's just out of context of the entire game. That just seems like, wow, you're just one massive jerk, Sonic. And of course, eventually Merlina summons this great being, magical being behind her, and then snaps Caliburn in half. And then he just stays there, getting beat up over and over again. And eventually the Knights of the Round Table are like, what are you doing?
You fool! This no longer has anything to do with chivalry! Get out of there! Run! It was never about chivalry for me. I just gotta do what I've gotta do. That's all.
If I was smart, I would have played the cutscene immediately after. But essentially what happens is that right after he says that, it doesn't matter if Sonic Adventure starts playing, and then he turns into Excalibur Sonic, which everybody said was, oh, look at how dumb and corny this is. It's awesome! He just, knight of gold armor, you get this massive CG cutscene where just Excalibur shines gold. It tickles my child part of my brain, and I absolutely love it. While the final boss isn't really that special, in fact, it's actually pretty easy. It has probably my favorite final boss theme with me, and the Crush 40 version is worse.
Yes.
Barely. It deserves that at the very least. And of course, we beat Merlina, and this is when I was playing this again for this panel, I started breaking down crying.
Merlina, every world has its end. I know that's kind of sad, but that's why we gotta live life to the fullest in the time we have. At least, that's what I figure.
Grandfather.
So yeah, I lost both my grandparents. And so when I played this through, this pretty much brought up a lot of memories that easily overwhelmed me, and then live life was just hit you like a truck. And my response was to going into my friend's DMs and being like, why was this, of all things, the game to break me? Of course, that didn't last long, because then, of course, it gets corny again, and Sonic is truly King Arthur this time. And King Arthur's legends suddenly become king. Sonic and the Black Knight, and as Sonic is explaining this all after the credits, Amy is like, yeah, that's a cool excuse. You're just skipping on our date that we had planned out. For whatever reason, until Frontiers, really, this was the best written Sonic game that we have gotten since Around Adventure 2. It is a lot, it has a lot to do with Sonic's characterization of him just doing anything and everything he can just to help those who can't protect themselves. For as short as it was, I think the story of Black Knight, as corny as Knuckles trying to, sacrifice himself because he lost a duel, is, I really enjoyed the game's story. And of course, I went ahead and beat all the missions after the game ends, and you actually get these cool legacy missions, where it's just like Secret Rings, but with the Black Knight control scheme. So, essentially, it's just really fun. But there is one mission that needs mentioned. Lancelot Returns. I don't even need to get into this as to what this is. This is whatever I like my recent playthrough. But essentially, suddenly the game just has one massive difficulty spike out of nowhere, and this took me forever to beat the child. And then when I went ahead and went back when I was back in college to beat this again, I couldn't do it. No matter what I did, I couldn't do it. Essentially, what happens is that he just has spear attack. You get close to him, he does chaos blast. Pretty much it's just kind of, you're like, oh, this is just really difficult. Ask anyone about their experience with this franchise, and they're going to tell you that Lancelot Returns is one of the hardest boss fights in this entire game going in casually. And then I beat it on my first try when I
on my first try? Are you?
If you want any advice here, level up Knight style. It makes this fight very easy. So of course, I didn't play through the battle mode because it's terrible. But essentially, what it is that you just duke it out with people. The players are bad. The controllers are bad. What? The controls are bad, but we do get to see Sir Galahad, which is Silver and Sir Lancelot. They were probably cut in development because what else did they do in the story of King Arthur? I don't know. I didn't read it. All of their voice lines are right from Sonic Riders on 06. But there is something really cool that I want to mention about the gallery, which is that there are pieces from a fan art contest that Sega held, and a lot of games are referenced here, even Sonic 06 and Secret Rings. Like, it's just one massive love letter to the franchise, and then you realize that some poor artist in Italy got plagiarized. I have to talk to Gamma about that. He's my friend in northern Italy. So, personally, it has a very special place in my childhood. Of course, there was, before you joined the panel, the story of me just staring at an ad for it in elementary school. Again, no friends. And it was just really, really fun to me. And even going back to it now, I really enjoy this as just people giving it a try. And I probably would have had this pretty close to 100%. And then the Unleashed Recompiled project came out. And so all sort of priorities were dropped immediately. So, of course, you probably already know that nothing really happened after this. They put out a poll on Facebook and said, hey, what would be a fun topic to cover next? And Greek mythology ended up winning. It was more so made for fun, but people thought of it to be an actual indication of a storyboard game being sued. Then there was whatever happened earlier this year when Dinosaur Jungle and Pirate Storm were kind of sort of confirmed for Sonic Crossworlds. Nobody expected this. Now, this isn't completely out of nowhere. You know, some games, some of the songs in the game, such as I think that the Sweet Mended showed up in Sonic Generations and Night of the Wind did too. And of course, with the jukebox and Sonic Frontiers, we got Missing Lake, Let's Be Mended again. Probably more because I still need to finish Sonic Frontiers. I got the Switch version in case you're wondering, and that's why I haven't finished it. At least the DLC. Basically what it means is that this is kind of part of a new trend with Sega where they want to go back and embrace everything Sonic, just instead of the 2010s mentality, which was, oh, we got slight criticism, let's ignore everything and drop this formula entirely and do something new. And by the way, that's how we got Sonic Lost World, in case you're wondering. But in terms of an actual project, we have Sonic and the Dragon's Path, which we don't have much on this yet, but it seems to be a fan game continuation of the series based on Chinese mythology, and nothing is really known outside of its premise and a reveal trailer. That's all I really have, but there is one thing I need to mention, because I know there's a question that some of you have. Who is this Opheria guy and why does it sound familiar? Okay, nobody. So, my proofreader for all of my scripts is Ian. Anyone here from this general vicinity? Yeah. Do any of these videos seem familiar to you?
No. There's gotta be a connection between hurricanes.
Yes, so when I'm not doing stuff like this, I do weather documentaries. And here's shameless self-promo. If you have any comments or questions, I think we ended pretty early, which I'm glad that I did, even with the techno situation. So free to ask questions and comments.
For Black Knight,
it honestly depends. It is a bit.
Well, if you win,
again, you can configure it on Dolphin, obviously. It just depends. It's, I would say it's similar to how it's handled with Unleashed, where yes, you can do it with buttons, but it feels more natural.
I'm good. Otherwise, I'm bad enough on YouTube.
Oh, right.
See? PS3 or 360?
What, for 06?
Yes.
That's I only played the 360 once.
Okay, so for those who are unaware, and this is a fun fact, when you install, this time I played Sonic 06 and I beat it like 4 times, which is like 4 times too many. When you install the game to the Xbox 360 hard drive, the load times range anywhere from around 2 seconds to 15. Very large variance there, but some missions load really quickly, some don't. With the PS3, you can, even when you install it to the game's to the system's hard drive, 30 seconds for every load time.
Yeah, experienced.
So, yes, 100% Sonic 06 on PS3 would probably be a bigger flex just because Sonic and the Secret Rings is a shorter game.
I don't have a Jesus Christ. That'll go Sonic.
No, he's asking, how did you beat Gamma?
Oh, weather documentary shenanigans.
It's all good there.
Like, in their personal opinion, what, they didn't make an official sort of game. What type of social media would want to do that?
Oh boy, geez, there's a lot to do. I'm a locally player of Puzzle and Dragons still after playing it for like 10 years. I'd love to see them go through Japanese mythology. I know Okami technically did it already, but seeing a Sonic take on that, really mythology itself is a really cool thing to go with. That's usually a safe way to go. Really, that just works out very well for this franchise. Yes.
Favorite song from Black Knight?
Molten Mind.
You're so real for that.
This is just a comment, but seeing that Excalibur transformation again, I realized when I was a kid, I looked it up a bunch of times and I loved it. It was the coolest moment of my life, I felt. And I was looking up Sonic and the Black Knight transformations. And I kept doing that. Eventually, they started recommending me magical soul transformations. And that's Sonic the magical girl fan today.
It's either the Sonic to Magical Girl or the Sonic to Love Life pipeline.
I got both.
Is Excalibur Sonic a magical girl?
Well, that's a good question.
Was it a mechanism? Because he's piloting this shit.
What? No, he's not piloting.
No.
It is just armor.
Is Excalibur Sonic a Sentai?
Probably.
Oh, shit.
Happy to help.
But of course, there's socials. There's also the Elveria Live channel where I just stream whenever it's not listed there. There's one more panel which is 18 plus. Thanks to Zomi Tojo and Mario Hara for ruining Love Live, which is at 11:30 and Live 4, I think, where I talk about all 15 years of Love Live in about an hour, and that was a terrible idea. Why did I do that? Going through 5 separate separate series, except really it's 4.5 because I can't cover Hasu.
This is my fault, by the way. All of this, everything's been my fault.
Yes.
Favorite Siva Gunner song?
Oh boy!
We're gonna be here for years!
I want to hear.
Okay. There is... Okay. I can't list them all. But Unholy Insurgency, mashed up with Propane Nightmares by Pendulum, goes insanely hard.
Alright, I will look it up.
I know Propane Nightmares.
I think that's about it. Of course, if you meet this thing, that's me. So, thank you all for showing up and listening to me yap for about an hour.